This presentation is about the organization of the Mathematics California Content Standards and how the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, or SBAC, test how the two of those work together. As you know, what gets assessed gets taught, and so what's important is what's being assessed, because what's being assessed right now with SBAC mirrors very strongly to our California content standards, along with the standards of mathematical practices. And so we're going to make sure we have a good knowledge, a good understanding of the California content standards. So the California content standards, they have an organization to them. And they're organized by domains, by clusters, and standards. Okay, and so we're going to focus at this point on domains. And so in kindergarten through 8th grade, the standards are organized by grade level and then by domains. Okay, so first level of organization is by grade level and then by domains. And what they mean by domains, these are clusters of standards that address big ideas and support connections of topics across the grade levels. So domains are big ideas. In your activity, Pathway to Algebra, you experienced some of those domains as you were creating that pathway. So when we look at the domains as a whole on the framework, this diagram is outlining all those domains. So we have the K8 domains that are listed over here on the left. Over on the right, this is modeling, and this is really for high school. So this is the high school side. Our focus truly is just grades K through 8. As you were going through your pathway to algebra, you're probably moving right along very nicely with the operations in algebraic thinking, because that was right there, K through 5. But then there's this kind of divide right here. There's a significant shift. All of a sudden, operations in algebraic thinking domain is no longer titled by that. But you probably went along and was focusing on perhaps expressions and equations, maybe ratios and proportional reasoning. You're making some educated decisions as you're moving along, and then you finally, if you got all the way up to 8th grade, most likely you were focusing on functions, but again, equations and expressions and equations could clearly be one. And finally in high school, you get to that algebra level. But the big idea here is that there's a big shift in our focus on our frameworks right here between grades 5 and 6. So in kindergarten through 5th grade, operations in algebraic thinking are present. We also have numbers and operations in base 10 right here. Measurement and data are consistent for those 6 grade levels. What tends to get isolated is kindergarten, counting and cardinality. Very important that students understand how to count and then have that early number sense. But that is going away in these grade levels because we're making the assumption that the students have mastered those. We also notice that in 3rd grade, numbers and operations and fractions. Fractions really come to the stage, so to speak, as big levels of emphasis there. So when we look at this K2 environment, just right here on K2, I don't like that color. So when we focus here just on K2, big emphasis right here is going to be your addition and subtraction and understanding our number operations in base 10. Very big concepts for K2. When we get into grades 3, 4, and 5, as we focus on the frameworks, grade 3 is very pivoting grade when we start talking about multiplication. So K5 is setting the stage for grades 6 through 8, as 6 through 8 starts to get much more complex with their reasoning. And so one question I get quite a bit when I'm working with 8th grade teachers is what's happening in the lower grades in terms of multiplication. They really need our kids to understand their multiplication beyond memorization. They want them to understand it conceptually, because that conceptual understanding of multiplication, sets the stage where students can go in this higher level thinking in all of these skills. And so if a student is lacking, let's say in multiplication, they're going to have a rough time in grades 6, 7, and 8 when they're having to do some higher level mathematics that's there. So anyway, big idea on your framework. Kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but these are your domains. And the domains, again, if we go back to that previous slide, domains are really big ideas. They are big ideas, and they support connections across the grades, and you see that with this particular slide. Okay, moving on, the next level of organization with our standards is the clusters. Okay, so we have clusters. And clusters are groups of related standards inside domains. So clusters are smaller than domains because they're inside of it. And so let's go ahead and take a look at what we mean by a cluster. So we're going to move to this particular slide. And so what we have here on this slide is that we have the domains. We have the various domains here. We have operations in algebraic thinking. By the way, this is grade 3. This is grade 3. So this is grade 3, just taken right out of the framework. So everything that I'm highlighting in yellow right now, these are domains. These are domains. Okay, these are domains. And then inside of domains, we have something that are called clusters. So these big ideas right here, these bulleted points, these are clusters, not standards, they're clusters. And the way our organization of our framework goes is that they're organized by cluster A, B, C, D. And that pattern of domain cluster is consistent throughout the K-8 framework. So we have domains and we have clusters. The other level of organization is that we finally get to standards. And standards basically is what students should understand and be able to do. The standards do not dictate curriculum or pedagogy, but the standards are telling us what students are able to do or are expected to do. And so what does a standard look like? Well, let's go ahead and look at this next slide. So this slide right here now outlines the domain cluster standard order of our framework. So again, we have our operations in algebraic thinking right here. That's our domain. And then this should be looking familiar from the previous page. We have a cluster, and a cluster is a big description. It's a big description, and it's describing what these standards are. Okay, what these standards are all the way through here. So this 1, 2, 3, and 4, those are standards. And we want to know these standards very well. All these standards, as you are in a grade level, you should be able to know when we talk about OA3, we should be able to understand that, hey, OA3, OA is a domain. We should know that it's a domain. Okay, we're going to know that's a domain. We're going to intuitively already know that it's also in cluster A. We just need to know these things, and it sits right there. Now over here on the right, we have this idea of a target, and so this is an SBAC nomenclature right here. This is about SBAC. Okay, so SBAC uses the terms uses the term target to describe clusters. That is a big deal. We'll get into that in greater detail in a bit, but I can't tell you how many times that I've been in teacher settings and we have this idea of discussing clusters and targets, and the epiphany goes, oh, clusters and targets mean the same thing. It's like, yes. So anyway, as a summary as to how our framework is organized. It's organized by this idea of domain. By this idea of a domain, which is that very big, broad idea. There's something that's called a cluster. So I'll highlight in blue right here. That's a cluster. That's really a cluster. That's a cluster description. I think that would be a better way of saying that. And then the standards are all right here. They're all right here, all the way through there. And so those are the broad ideas of how our framework is organized. That rhythm and beat takes place throughout our entire framework. It's important to note that the K-5 framework, that area is really focusing on operations, algebraic thinking, number-based 10, measurement, and data. And then whenever you get to grade 6, 7, and 8, you can see those four right here, the EEs, the number system, statistics, probability, and geometry being consistent. And then this idea of ratios and proportional reasoning just flows right into very nicely into functions. And so that's our K-8 game plan that our frameworks describe. It's our communication tool on what kids are expected to know in our instruction. So when we take a look at creating lesson plans, our lesson plans really are going to focus off on standards. But here's my question. Are standards enough information to set the expectation of what students are to be able to do? And I think that question's answer is basically on what kids are actually doing with their math. And so it comes down to application. What type of problems are we putting in front of the students to demonstrate if they understand these standards? And so that topic will be coming up in a bit.